our final topic, Kirk Cousins and his contract have been a thing that people have been talking about all the time. And the Vikings Super Bowl window, the move to get Kirk Cousins was primarily because the Vikings thought they were in a window to win the Super Bowl in the next 3 years. Year 1 of 3 did not go as planned, to say the least. And now they have 2 off seasons, and this one is huge in particular, to establish getting themselves back on track. Because like we've said, this team didn't have a big hole besides maybe the offensive line that sank their season. It was mainly a bunch of small cracks in the foundation that kind of led it all to kind of come tumbling down. So where do you fix that? And the question I want to get, the biggest question I want to get to is, can the Vikings still win a Super Bowl with as much as Kirk Cousins' contract is taking up? What do you think, Ian?
Well, there was the huge stat that came out that was like, well, none of the top 6 teams that pay their quarterbacks, none of the top 6 paid quarterbacks made the playoffs this year. And I don't necessarily think that is going to be a model that keeps being successful going forward. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions to the rule. I think the 2 teams on that list that have the best chance of it are Minnesota and Atlanta, because Atlanta was decimated by injuries and they still won like 6 or 7 games. Matt Ryan had one of the best years of his career, and it was very much overshadowed by the fact that Atlanta had a terrible, terrible season. He almost threw for 5,000 yards. I think he had 40 touchdowns. It was a very good year for Matt Ryan, but I don't think that stat will hold true going into the future. But there is a concern that we're going to have to do something like cutting Everson Griffin or trading Xavier Rhodes in order to free up some cap space to make moves that might help the team. And I think building through the draft might be fine, but for the offensive line concerns, you're going to have to hit a home run. Like finding a Quentin Nelson, and having him come in as a rookie and make an immediate impact on the offensive line. And I think it's going to be tough because, a lot of the free agent offensive line moves that were made this year didn't pan out, especially the big ones like Nate Solder to the Giants. It's tough because I do think, to answer your question though, I do think we can win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins' current contract, because we have a good enough defense when they're healthy, when they're playing together. We have talented wide receivers, running back, a good tight end. If we can get the offensive line figured out and our offensive coordination figured out, we saw glimpses of it this year, that Cousins can make the plays that Keenum couldn't. Obviously, Keenum was more athletic than Cousins, but you don't have to be athletic to succeed in this league. Look at Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers,
Peyton Manning.
Big Ben's not super athletic anymore. He was more athletic than all those guys we just mentioned.
And all of them were sort of athletic at their own point. Yeah. But when they get into this past 30 in their careers.
Yeah, it's tougher for any quarterback. But, I don't think you're going to see Kirk Cousins' legacy come out to be this great quarterback. I do think we could do it, though. I do think we can. There is a formula that we can find that helps us win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins as our starting quarterback.
Well, and here's my thing. I think you're right. I think this team they can, but let me explain. I'm not against that way of thinking, but let me play devil's advocate here and kind of go through some stuff. Now, I looked it up on SpotTrack.com, looking at the Vikings salary cap situations. The Vikings, in estimated cap space, with everything going on, how much cap space do you think the Vikings have right now?
Under $5 million.
Close, actually. 5.3 is the estimated salary cap space we have. Now, that is not enough money to get a solid NFL free agent. Now, here are some contracts the Vikings could restructure. Reef, Remmers, Rudolph. They'll probably cut Sendejo. There's a good chance that they cut Mike Remmers. So they lose out. They can gain some salary back. They can maybe restructure a couple deals and try and figure some things out. But the Vikings, if the Vikings are going to want to do this, they're going to have to. It's not going to be through free agency. Free agency is going to be for depth. You're not going to find a starter. The Vikings aren't going to go out and say, "Oh, here's the best line." They're not going to go out and say, "Oh, Shane Ray is on the market. Here's all this money for Shane Ray." No, they're not going to be able to do that. They could maybe say, "Hey, here's just for an example, Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson. Here's $4 million to play wide receiver this season. Here you go. But the Vikings are going to have to do it through the draft. And like Ian said, they're going to have to hit home runs, and they're going to have to hit home runs on the offensive line. And that's something that Spielman has had trouble doing in his career, is drafting offensive linemen. Matt Khalil, David Yankee, Willie Beavers, TJ Clemmings. You think of all these names. Now he's had a couple. Pat Elflein, Brian O'Neill. They look to be pretty decent. But, when you look at the sample size, it's a lot more towards whiffing than it is to success, which is, for most general managers, usually what happens.
And Brian O'Neill was young this year. So
he was and we've talked about...
Maybe, hopefully, he can take another big step forward this year. And
with a full offseason to...
Mm-hmm. And Nick Easton got hurt, and not that Easton was an elite offensive line option that we had, but it might have helped, We talked about it before the season started, when it happened, and we were like, well, we'll see how it goes. We weren't too scared about it, but how would that have helped? Maybe that would have been something...
I mean, I was pretty scared. I was scared when it happened. I was nervous, because we all knew that the line was going to be an issue, but I think the problem is, though, is we're going to have to... they still have holes to fill, and I had a blog post come out talking about 5 positions the Vikings need to fix, and besides offensive line, kicker, you can probably figure that one out fine. That's not going to really, salary cap-wise, going to be a big deal. But you look at the linebackers, Anthony Barr is probably going to leave. Franchise tagging him would cost about $15 million. That's probably not in the Vikings' range to do that. Barr's probably not going to stay here long term. So the only way to get him to stay would be through the franchise tag. So you're going to have to find another linebacker. That's going to have to be in the draft. Defensive line, Sheldon Richardson. He was $7 million last year, I believe, to play here. Is he going to sign? I don't think he'd re-sign, because he was basically here to get a 1-year deal to kind of use that to leverage himself to a long-term deal. I wish he would stay. I don't think he's going to stay. So you have the wide receiver number 3 would be another one. Tight end number 2. So you can't just say, we'll draft that, we'll draft that, we'll draft that. And again, not every roster is going to be perfect. There are going to be flaws. There are flaws on every single roster in football. But if you're the Vikings, to be a Super Bowl caliber team, not just a good team, because they're already a good team, to be a Super Bowl caliber team, they're going to have to hit on so many things right now. And again, the foundation is in place. So I'm not saying they can't, but I'm saying they're going to have to hit every single move they make this offseason, or at least a lot of them. They can't afford to have a big swing and a miss. Because if they do, they're not going to win the Super Bowl. So I think, is it possible? Yes. Is it realistic? I'm not so sure that with how big his contract... And this isn't about Kirk Cousins playing. It's about his contract. Like the Ravens with Joe Flacco. Like other teams who have paid their... Like the Seahawks and Russell Wilson. It doesn't matter how good your quarterback is, but how much cap space they take up is important. And I think it puts the Vikings in a very tough position, and I'm not sure that they can, based on the way that their salary cap is set up right now. They're going to have to do a lot of work to make this all fit.
I agree. I think it's going to be tough. If we can keep some of the guys around, then maybe. But like you said, it's going to be tough. And maybe we paid Cousins too much. But, I mean, if we wouldn't have, we probably wouldn't have gotten him. And we might have ended up drafting a quarterback. I don't think we would have had a very favorable draft position to do that. We would have had to give up something and trade up to get one of the 5 quarterbacks that were taken in the first round this year. But, it just... And we probably actually wouldn't have even ended up doing that. We probably would have either rolled with Keenum or with Bridgewater.
Yeah, and the problem...
Most likely Bridgewater. But
Teddy coming off the knee injury.
You didn't know. So it would have been a lot different. And you would have had to pay Teddy so much money, but I don't think Teddy with that team would have necessarily helped us any better than, I don't know. It's so tough.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you all, looking back, you can always feel that you'd make the right decision, but at the time, even somebody who was a Bridgewater apologist myself last year was still saying, no, we should probably go get Kirk Cousins. So, again, looking back, you would say, well, maybe I would have thought this different, but then you still say, but at the time. And the Jimmy Butler trade was another one. Well, looking back, it was a bigger hassle than what it was worth, but at the time, it was the move to be made. So,
and I think maybe, just maybe, some quarterbacks are starting to figure out that that's what you need to do, is take a little bit less money if you want the championships. Now, obviously, Kirk Cousins can't, I don't think, cut his salary in the middle of this
Why
contract.
would you? I don't think.
Why would you want to?
If it's fully guaranteed.
Exactly. But maybe if he's still playing at the level that he is now, 2 years from now, he's like, all right, re-sign me for less, like this. We still have Diggs, we still have Thielen, because they're both young. Dalvin Cook will still be around if he's like re-signed, whatever, happens. We'll still have this core of offensive talent. Maybe we can bring in some more guys now because I'll take less money. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be the coolest thing to watch us struggle and have all these expectations for the next couple of years and probably do the same thing we've done and go 8-7-1 and whatever. But I think that it's something that could happen. We're in a little bit of a dark spot right now. We're kind of in the dark. You don't know what to expect really from the future. You had high expectations coming in this year, and we definitely got let down. So you're in a little bit of a dark spot. You're in a dark closet right now, and you don't know if the door's ever going to get unlocked.